In this screencast, we're going to deploy a Django application from a GitHub repository to App Engine using the Codeship. I've got a simple Django application called Codefish, which contains some tests. If you want to follow along the setup steps on your computer, just fork the repository. We're going to deploy this application to App Engine using the Codeship. Let's sign into the Codeship with GitHub. The Codeship needs access to our GitHub repositories to be able to set them up. Let's allow access. We're back at the Codeship. Now let's create our first project. The first step of our project setup is to select GitHub as our repository provider. In the list of my GitHub repositories, I search for my repo Codefish Django App Engine and select it. Now our repository is connected and we can set up our test commands. We select Python as our technology. This pre-populates the setup commands and the test commands for us. We can leave the setup commands as they are. We want to install our dependencies from the requirements.txt. Our application doesn't need a database, so we can leave the database setup commands commented out. We don't have to change the test commands either, as our tests can be run with Python manage_py test. Now let's finish our setup and go to the dashboard. We can trigger a build for our application by pushing to our repository. Let's add the Codeship status image to the README file. Now let's commit and push this change. This triggered a new build on the Codeship. We can access the build details by clicking the arrow on the right. Here we can follow the running build. By the way, if you ever need help, check out the Codeship documentation. If you encounter any problems, contact the Codeship crew by clicking on the support links in the top right or the bottom right corner. And a few seconds later, our build succeeded. Great! We see all the commands that were run. After a few initial preparation commands, the Codeship ran the commands that we specified a few moments ago. We can inspect the output of a single command by clicking on it, so we can see that 2 tests were run. We've already pushed to our repository, watched our build log and got a green build, so we can finish this assistant. Now let's deploy our application to App Engine. We can go to our project settings by clicking on the settings icon in the projects dropdown, and then to the deployment section. We want to deploy to App Engine. Before we can configure our App Engine deployment, we need to connect our App Engine account to Codeship. Let's accept the connection. When we select App Engine again, we can configure our deployment. We can leave the path as it is, but I'd like to enter the URL to our application. So let's create an application on App Engine. I enter my-codefish as identifier and Codefish as application name, and I create the application. Now I can enter my application URL http mycodefish.appspot.com into my deployment configuration. This way the Codeship can check if my application works after deployment. Now let's save our deployment configuration. From now on, the Codeship will deploy our application to App Engine every time we push to our GitHub repository. Let's get our application ready for App Engine. We create a file app.yaml in the root directory of our application. In this configuration file, we tell App Engine that our web application is called my-codefish and that it is a Python app. We say that the version is 1 and the API version is 1 as well. And finally, we add a handler for all URLs to be handled by Django bootstrap.py. I commit and push this change, and immediately another build starts running on the Codeship. Let's go back to our project overview. I will fast forward until the build is finished. After the commands we already know from our first build, our application also gets deployed to App Engine now. And about 2 minutes later, our application is online. When we open my-codefish.appspot.com now, our deployed application appears. If you need help with setting up your own application, please use the support link in the top right corner or tweet us at Codeship.